Welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
It's the Rock Newman Show.
And now, the Rock Newman Show.
Folks, welcome back to the third hour of the Rock Newman Show today, November the 2nd, 2013. I am very, very happy to have as my guest this hour Emily Griffin. She is the founder of what is called Happy Parents, Happy Babies, LLC. Now, after that last segment where we talked about race in America, I'm going to take the liberty with Emily that Emily is practicing what some folks call from the movie Jungle Fever. Emily is married to a black man, a white lady married to a black man. They got 4 beautiful sons. So, Emily, first of all, welcome to the Rock Newman Show.
Thank you.
Didn't necessarily plan to go there, but after that last segment, I thought it might be appropriate. Let me ask you, you're married to a black man.
Yes.
You have 4 babies. What, if any, have you any incidents of racism or racial consciousness that have you encountered in that experience? How long have you been married?
We have been married for a little over a year.
Okay.
We were together for about 8 years. We took our time. I'm part of a blended family. My first husband is also African American.
Okay.
Okay. And I would say that in high school, when I was with my first husband, that's where I dealt with the most outright aggression or negativity. Criticism.
In what form? You get it from white side, black side, one side or the other? Or?
I would say more direct comments would be from other black students who, girls who would say, "Oh, you're taking
Our black men." Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. In college, we were in North Carolina for a couple of years, and we'd get some looks, but I'm very conscientious of raising children who have, I don't like to say biracial because we're all of one race, but I'm very conscious of the challenges that my sons may come across, and as a family, we are very aware of that and have nurtured a spirit in them so that they can feel good about themselves as unique individuals and also be prepared for facing certain things. Like, my oldest son is 13 now.
Right.
And, he's had comments from his friends sometimes like, "Oh, that's your mom?"
Right.
So not that, and some of his friends may not deal with that same question. So
you're in a unique position. Mm-hmm. You probably can understand better than most. We did a lot around the subject of the what I refer to as the murder of Trayvon Martin. Mm. And I talked about the horror that black mothers felt and the fear that they felt with about their sons, mm-hmm. that was unlike what white mothers in the white community might feel. But you're a white mother who has a son that could be Trayvon Martin. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. How did you feel during that experience, during that time?
Well, as a family, we were grieving. It was an awful, awful night to deal with that verdict, and I was just shocked. And I've always just connected with people, and have always tried to have empathy. And it doesn't take a whole lot of effort in that regard for me, to connect with people, no matter what shade of skin they have or where they come from in the world. That kind of suffering is just awful, and I feel for Trayvon's parents, and I think I'm hoping that we're at a place as a country where we can have really productive conversations and move our youth to a better place as well, so we can come together as a society.
All right, so let's start talking about happy parents, happy babies. How did you happen upon that title? And tell us about your experiences and your growth to get to this point.
Well, it's been quite a path for me. I would say that, in some ways I was very privileged and comfortable growing up, but we also had some very personal things that we struggled with mental illness in the family, and a lot of family conflict that I had to work through that my parents didn't quite know how to protect me from. And so dealing with all of those challenges, I had to build a resilience and use my resources. So I took to the comfort of friends who lived around the city. I spent a lot of time spending the night at my friends' houses and getting to know different families and makeups of them, and finding comfort from their parents as well. And so overcoming, I wound up having some significant losses in my life. Most importantly, my brother. He died when I was 16 after a long struggle with mental illness and self-medicating with drugs. There were a lot of traumatic incidents around that struggle that he had that, I watched him, and my parents have a hard time with trying to figure out how to meet his needs. So they couldn't quite tend to my needs in the way that I needed that to. So, I learned a lot. I had to do a lot of healing. My social work education was a huge new chapter for me. It helped me to process a lot of those hurtful and confusing experiences.
Was your brother older than you?
He was. Yes. I'm sorry. He was 12 years older. And
and how old was he when he died?
He was 28.
So he was 28. So you're 10 years old, and you're watching your 20.
He was 28 and I was 16.
Yeah, but I'm.
Oh, you're saying?
Yeah. I'm sorry, but as a kid, you're seeing and becoming aware of this incredible, struggle that is right within your family unit. Yeah. What do you remember as a child? How did that affect you most?
Well, I didn't understand it. Well, I guess when I look back, it's so hurtful to have that vision of my brother and clearly him crying out and having needs that were not met. And what really sticks with me is how I'm sure there were so many opportunities, along the way, that if my parents had the resources, if someone was able to work with them on who he was, what his needs were, and
meeting him where he was.
Exactly. Then, things could have been different. But I would say that in how I healed from the loss, it has really impacted for the better who I am as a parent.
Right.
I can really value my role in being deliberate with shaping who my children are.
Yes.
And allowing them to be who they are naturally and help nurture that and their sense of self-confidence and self-worth, what their purpose is, and I feel like that experience with him helped me to value every child more.
Yeah.
And how they are a gift. And so I'm trying to translate. My passion comes from wanting to be able to help parents to cherish their gift that's here.
Well, part of what I found so fascinating and why I'm really happy that you're sitting there is because it is out of when we can take sort of snatch victory from defeat and take out of the personal tragedies that we experience a lesson that we then are able to internalize, heal, and then help make the world a little better place. That, I think, is, the best of all of the mission that we have. And you came from a place where you had, obviously, it wasn't just the death.
Right.
But it was a tragic dying process.
It was years of
that you experienced.
Torture, yes.
And you just said what I think is a key word. It was a torture.
It was.
And from that torture chamber of those years, you come out and you seek something and you actualize. And you deal with that pain, and it never fully goes away.
Right.
You heal. Mm-hmm. But you deal with that pain, and then you start to offer something that can help other people mitigate circumstances that caused you such great pain. I want to give you a big round of applause for that.
Thank you.
And again, really, thank you for being here, because you have very important guests. You're a very important guest for us to have on this show to impart to our listening audience. So let's start talking about your practice now.
Okay.
Healthy parents. How do you help parents become healthy?
Well, let me talk a little bit about my background and how I got to that
Please
place.
do. Please
okay.
do. Yeah.
So after I got my social work education, you may not know, but part of when you're actually taking social work classes, you're also required to do internships. So I started getting my practice working with clients while I was also in school, because you have to be able to, start flexing those muscles to figure out how you're really going to meet the needs of clients. So I was working with kids in the juvenile probation system in Arlington. I worked with Metro DCP flag with helping to support families around GLBT support. And so so my first job when I actually came out of school was I worked with Child and Family Services. So working with families who either had their children removed from the home or were at risk of having their children removed from the home. Mm-hmm. So a lot of crisis support, but also trying to, I really wanted to not just focus on putting out fires, in crisis,
Sure.
but also prevent fires.
Proactive.
Yes,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And that's always that's always been my natural instinct. Mm-hmm. So because that was my natural instinct, I felt it was time to I served my time, and it was valuable experience there.
Sure.
But working in the schools was something that was a major goal of mine after that. So I worked for 8 years in a charter school supporting students, namely adolescents and their families. Mm-hmm. And
now, when you say supporting them, define that support. Define the kind of support. Give us examples of what you did.
Individual counseling around things like grief and loss, building social skills, dealing with peer conflict, classroom management. There may be behaviors or academic support that's needed. There may be issues at home that are affecting what we're seeing at school, that are distracting them from doing their best. Yeah. So
peer conflict, mm-hmm. major
yes.
stuff.
Yes.
I remember going to the airport with my granddaughter. She was going on a trip from Las Vegas. They were going to New York City, and I had some connections. So I come in, being Big Papa, and, come in, and there's a long, long line. And I knew some people, and I didn't have to wait in that line. And I took her by the hand, and started up to the front of the line, and she started pulling back. And I was like, well, what's up? We're going to go up here and, we're going to get ahead of the whole crowd. And she didn't want that. She didn't want, it was very important for her to fit in with her peers. Now, that's a mild example, but that was peer pressure. There's a certain peer pressure there. And part of what I found is the significant influence of peers, and what is the important for parents to understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we did workshops along with the school psychologist. We did it together, interactive workshops, helping parents to understand how they can support, especially in this age, with kids being on Facebook on their phones and Twitter and Instagram. So you have this whole issue of documentation, that we just didn't have. I would write a note and pass it. It may get to the wrong person, but at least it's just on a little piece of paper and it can be thrown away.
Right.
That is totally different now, and really helping the kids. That parents have to help kids understand how permanent these notes are. It's all documentation. It's going to come back to you, and kids, they'll hear it. They'll hear it if parents are deliberate from the beginning and limit that media use and limit the dependency, because I think that's part of it. You have to help nurture other interests so that they're not always thinking and trying to sneak and find ways to get back on the computer or on the phone, because you have to have that along with the limits, helping them understand.
I got to sneak into this commercial break right now. We're going to come back with Emily Griffin talking to you about parenting and how to rear productive model citizens on The Rock Newman Show in just a few moments.
And now, The Rock Newman Show.
Hi, folks. Welcome back to The Rock Newman Show. My guest this hour, Emily Griffin. Emily is someone who survived her childhood really being traumatized by a family situation where there was mental illness and ultimately self-medication by drugs that led to the untimely death of her brother at 28 years old. And sort of during that process, she was traumatized naturally, but she came out of that process, out of that very tragic situation, with an interest and a desire to heal, one, and then to do something to help parents to be able to provide support, understanding, and clarity to their own children that would help mitigate the kind of trauma that she experienced. She went on to get an education to become a licensed social worker, and she's here with us today. She is the founder of Happy Parents, Happy Babies, and that is her company. And part of what you do today is you actually go into households talking to parents in familiar territory about the things that you want to help try to provide them to simply be better parents and better people.
Exactly. And, just as I had my own process with, understanding my past and how that influenced who I am today, and really healing from the things that needed to be healed, and also taking the positive, the strengths, and, approaching that parenting with purpose and with a self-awareness that allows for a stronger attachment between myself and my children, and helping just strengthening that bond, because that's so key with helping our kids get started, off to the right start. So Happy Parents, Happy Babies is really about helping parents to build their sense of purpose and kind of discover actualize who they can best be as a parent, building on their individual strengths, processing and reflecting on their experiences, because often parents don't really think about, well, okay, I had these experiences as a child. They don't really impact me right now, but it comes out. They do.
Yeah.
They do. And if you don't do some work in understanding how that does shape you, it's not that you can't have those experiences. We're all a mixed bag, with and have had experiences.
Everybody got to say a story.
Exactly.
Everybody got a hard story to tell. Sure.
Everybody has their hardships and their challenges, but what do you do with that? And you have to have that self-awareness to be the best parent that you can be. You have to hold that and not have a focus on perfectionism, to be able to face your imperfections and to be honest in your parenting approach. I can work with parents to actualize who they are and be honest and build the strongest bond. Starting from, I have a client who was pregnant when she called me, and she was concerned. She had had a history of some anxiety, and she was concerned about going to the hospital and what that experience was going to be. And she didn't want to. She understood that the baby could sense when she was overly anxious, and that's true. You start that relationship when they're in the womb. And that's very real. So I helped her with processing that anxiety to help her feel more prepared and have some relaxation strategies to help her work through that anxiety. So when that experience did come, she could have, she could focus on that bond with her baby and not be so worried about the external circumstances.
Yeah,
exactly.
So I really want to talk to you in depth, if we can,
sure,
about the techniques that you've learned. I mean, because part of what we try to do here with every conversation, as similar to Busboys and Poets' mission, is kind of changing the world one person at a time and one conversation at a time. The techniques that you have employed to help folks, I really want to get into that. Are your parents still alive?
They are.
Okay, now, so you come into this awareness, and you now are teaching parents how to be better parents. Have you been able to communicate with your parents in a way that helps them, that ultimately may have strengthened or challenged your relationship with them?
Well, we've definitely come to a great place in our relationship with my father and with my mother. They also had her issues with mental illness. So they, I think everyone evolves. Yeah. If you...
Did you, going through that process as a child, you got to be 16, your brother didn't die, he died when he was 28 years old. Did you blame your parents?
I struggled with that. I didn't have any training in human behavior at that point, but my instincts told me, well, there's must have been something different that they could have done, So I did struggle with that a little bit, and but I think ultimately they did the best that they could. The mental health system still has a lot of progress to make, and at that time it certainly did. And so I think that was part of the struggle for sure. Yeah. They were trying to.
Were your parents like so many who tried to prevent the outside world from being aware of the struggles that they were experiencing with mental illness? I know many. Yes. I know many who do that to the detriment of the child they're trying to protect and to the family unit.
Yeah, well, I think, and part of that is, self-denial. There's so many families that wait until things are really bad before they ask for help. And, I was little. I was little when things were playing out. So my understanding of exactly how things went, I've had to kind of piece it together, talking to different family members. But, I think one thing I've taken away from that whole experience is that I think that's one of the reasons why I tend to approach things in such a proactive manner, I think, because I've seen how things can play out very vividly, if you're not taking a proactive approach. But on a positive note, my parents have a great relationship with my children. We've come to a very productive, happy place in my family. And I think part of it is how I've been able to process things. And just like every family, when you have your own children, you have to kind of set what your parenting approach is, and okay, grandma or grandpa, you have these things that you want to do, or certain ways you approach things, and you have to. There's a process to make that transition and adjustment. Everyone has that time to. Make that to figure out how you're going to be a family unit now that there's another generation at play. So
you talk a lot about parenting. You talk about purpose. Tell us about that.
Well, I really feel like everyone who is here for a reason, and that sense of spirituality stays with me, and I wear it on my sleeve passionately, and I think it comes out in the work that I do. It's really important to me to help parents, to help them understand that they do have great strengths, that sometimes it just in the day-to-day chaos, they don't even stop to appreciate themselves, and that lack of self-care that parents need to have for themselves, it impacts their connection with their child. So
are you saying a lack of self-care for themselves? In other words, you become a parent, sort of lose yourself trying to do everything for the kid, and so you lose yourself to your own detriment, and then to your kid's detriment. Is that what you're saying?
Right, exactly.
And so how do you teach them to get that back?
Well, one analogy that a lot of mental health providers use that I've heard at trainings that is very true is it's like, when you're on the airplane and they're showing you how to use the mask, and they tell you you have to put on your own mask before you reach to help a child or anyone else. You have to. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it works. You have to nurture your own spirit, no matter how many children you have, how many jobs you have. It cuts across socioeconomic groups or circumstances. You have to take care of yourself to be able to really be present in your relationship and connection with your family. And when parents can do that, it just makes such a big difference.
Let me ask you about this. One of these taboo subjects, incest. And what you, if any, you've experienced in dealing with the clients, that's a giant. People say sleeping giant, but that's a giant that never sleeps. It seems always lurking with those who've experienced it.
Well, what I find to be even more common is when, yes, you're right, it's an awful thing that people don't like to talk about, but many people have unfortunately dealt with, and treatment is so important. It is. Yeah. What's even more common is a family friend or an uncle, someone who may not necessarily be the head of household, but someone who's spent time around that child. So that's why it's really important for parents to have conversations with their kids about safety and what safe touches are, and just making sure that they have those lines of communication.
And do you find that getting better now than previous time? Because obviously what you're talking about is so critically important, but you come in contact with, I come in contact with so many people and try to have open, candid conversation, and people don't necessarily do that. They're not. I don't understand the reasoning why that they're not inoculating their children with those kind of candid discussions. Oftentimes the reasoning given, excuse, call it what you will, is I don't want them thinking about that kind of thing. Well, you're leaving them exposed to something that you could be protecting them from.
That's true. That's true. And it's a great question, I think. And also part of it is just a matter of time too. There are very important conversations that parents need to have with their kids about everything from dealing with traffic, living in the city, to how to be a good friend, to how to deal with the media and what's appropriate to watch and what's not. There are conversations that are not being had because parents are preoccupied with their to-do lists, or they may be dealing with a stressful situation that's just draining them of energy, where they need to it needs to be directed towards their children too. So that's part of it. When you are able to carve out time and be deliberate with your self-care and approach things from a sense of self-awareness, then you are then in turn more emotionally available to connect with your child, and they feel that, and they're able to voice when they have real concerns, and then you can meet their needs better too.
Alicia Keys and Halle Berry, both black father, white mother, clearly identify as being black women. Now, they're biracial, but they clearly identify as being black women. Mm-hmm. You have sons by your white lady, by a black man. What's their identity? How will they identify?
Well, we talk with them and ultimately work with what they're comfortable saying, but we don't make it a major issue for them to feel self-conscious about. So, we work with where they are developmentally about it.
Mm-hmm. And how old? What's the age range?
I have a 13-year-old, 7-year-old, 22 months, and 4 months.
So you got 4 full-time jobs in addition to this one and being a wife.
Yes.
Okay, we'll talk more with Emily Griffin when we come back on The Rock Newman Show. Today, November the 2nd, 2013. I'm going to give you some information when we come back about changing the clock. When did we change the clock this year? We'll talk about it when we come back after these messages.
And now, The Rock Newman Show.
Folks, welcome back to The Rock Newman Show. This is our last segment today in the 11 o'clock hour. My guest is Emily Griffin. She is the founder of Happy Parents, Happy Babies. And the business is about helping you to become the best you so you can become the best parent. I want to make everyone aware that on next Saturday, we're going to do a special broadcast of The Rock Newman Show. It is going to be a broadcast that is done live on WHUT, Howard University Television, Channel 32. We will be broadcasting from 10 to 11 a.m. only, and we will have His Honor, the Mayor of Washington, D.C., Vince Gray. As you heard earlier by City Council Chairman Phil Mendelson, there is the expectation that somewhere around late next week, Thursday, Friday, maybe Saturday on The Rock Newman Show, who knows, Vince Gray will announce whether or not he's going to run for mayor or whether he's going to allow this one term to serve out and turn the reins over to someone else. So it's a big news around Washington, D.C., and The Rock Newman Show, Busboys and Poets, WHUT is going to be in the thick of that news as we host the mayor for a special broadcast of The Rock Newman Show, again, on WHUT, Channel 32, 10 to 11 a.m. next Saturday. Tell all your friends to tune in. Back now to my guest, Emily Griffin. Emily, let's talk about what you do. You talk to a parent, you do an assessment and decide that it's time, or they decide, really, it's time for them to get some coaching, some help. Because you know what? There's not a manual. You know, you talked about your situation of being a child growing up in a home with mental illness issues in the family, drug abuse issues in the family. You've come out as a mother of 4, running a successful business. And your brother met an untimely demise. And oftentimes there is the question, how could one child be so dramatically different from the next? There's really no clear-cut prescription how to raise a child, how to rear a child. So walk me through the process where you assess a parent's needs, you go in. Take me through that process.
Sure. Well, some families, because of either health concerns or mobility, travel, maybe they're just too busy. It makes more sense for me to come to them rather than them going to an office to see a therapist. So I go to their home. No cleaning up needed. I'm very down to earth, and that's one thing that I make sure parents know, that I'm very, they can just be comfortable.
Sure.
So, because part of it too is me being able to just see what their natural environment is, and how they've set up the household for themselves and their kids, what their routine is. So I might spend a little time just observing how they're interacting with their kids, and it depends on what the situation is. Like I said, I'll work with expectant parents as well, so maybe they're just trying to be proactive, and they might have some concerns about their past that they don't want to interfere with having a healthy attachment and a nice healthy relationship with their child. So we can be proactive and process some of those things that they experience and what their intentions are, so that they can address their fears. We can address those fears together with techniques around mindfulness, that's something that's been used a lot, that's gotten a major spotlight recently.
So techniques around mindfulness, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm. So mindfulness is essentially focusing on the present. It's the ability to accept the past, accept what could possibly happen in the future, and be able to focus on the present in a calm, enjoyable way. And, people, it sounds harder than, it's harder than it sounds for
I was about to say.
people.
I was
Yes,
about to
it's
say
harder
just
than
that.
it sounds.
Right, sure.
But it's something that has changed my life and helped me to be more present with my children, actively in the present, and it's helped me.
So you've gotten there.
Yes.
You've gotten there.
Yes.
How did you get there?
I've used those techniques. There are techniques that you can use when you have a trigger, when there's something that is particularly stressful for you. It includes things like meditation and using positive things for you to say to yourself instead of negative thoughts that keep you in that cycle. It's been used for not only things like anxiety and improving your mental state around if you're suffering from depression, but also physical things. I was suffering from chronic physical illness, and I am at a much better place with managing that, as well as anxious thoughts. I'm just in such a happier place. So when I chose to name my business Happy Parents, Happy Babies, I was really claiming my victory personally, and stepping into helping other parents from a very passionate place, coming through quite a journey. So those techniques, it depends on, it's a very individualized process. because everyone has sensitive spots that can trigger, angry responses to their child, and they wonder, well, where is that coming from? I wish I didn't say that. Before they know it, they got their buttons pushed and they didn't step back before it happened. So helping parents to address patterns, and especially if there are patterns from when they were a child that they don't want to repeat. That's why I focus on families with younger children, or even if they haven't had their child yet, but adapting to having a new baby, really focusing on helping families to get off to the best start. Because if we can be proactive and process all of those experiences that make you who you are, then you can enjoy your family more, even if you feel like you don't have the time to take care of yourself and to have quality experiences with your families. It can be done, and we figure it out together.
On my social media sites, when I said you were coming on, one of the raging debates that got started was to spank or not to spank. Spare the rod or whip that ass. Which, and I'm telling you, there was some very powerful, compelling arguments on both sides of that coin. Where do you stand?
I'll say this. Having high expectations and a high level of nurturing is what combines to be what's called the authoritative parenting style. And that's what tends to have the best positive outcomes.
Break that down for me.
Okay? So you want to be consistent with what your expectations are. You don't want to come from a place. See, in my experience, oftentimes when parents have hit their child, it's out of anger and frustration. Okay? I've known people who've grown up who have gotten a couple of cracks on their butts, but in a methodical way, and they seem to be just fine. Okay? But when we are lashing out at our children because we're not dealing with our emotional needs, we have to remember they're kids, right? And they're going to test limits, they're going to test boundaries, but they really want to please you. They really do. And they start out that way. And when you establish that trusting, strong bond from the beginning, it makes things a lot easier moving forward. It really does. So then you're not even in. When people have asked me, have I hit my kids? I've never felt the need to. So that I haven't.
You've been touched.
I haven't.
You've been touched. Yeah. No, I understand.
Because it's how I've intentionally approached parenting from the beginning and how I deal with things along the way. Okay, sometimes parents do too much talking when they need to go take a time out for themselves. Okay? And sometimes they don't talk enough. So it's about really figuring out, like tuning into your child to figure out what is this behavior about? Because chances are there's something like maybe you haven't spent enough time together recently, There could be something going on at school. There could be something on his or her mind that needs to be addressed that's behind the behavior.
I think the whole idea of spanking and not spanking is in part a generational thing. Most people in my generation talk about the whippings they used to get. Not just the kind of whippings on a regular basis, but when you really kind of think about how part of that whipping came, was like, okay, old Richard Pryor joke, go out there and get me a switch and bring that switch back so, I can whip up on you. Most that I know that are my age, my friends in my generation, got a whole bunch of whippings.
Yeah.
I really only got smacked on the butt hard, really one time, and I don't know what got into my nephew and I, but we were out beside the road, and it was, you know, summertime, it was hot, we had shorts on. I never heard of mooning, but we were pulling our pants down, and my mom came and tore us up. Mm-hmm. That was the only whipping that I got. Now, I'm 61. Let's talk 30 people who are like 30 years old. It's very much, that's where the debate seems to rage in a younger generation about whether or not to, you know, spare that rod. Now, what you just said makes a whole lot of sense. And so there needs to probably be a whole lot more of you practicing what you practice and teaching people how to establish the kind of relationship with children where there is not the need for spanking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not that you're not, I'm not saying I haven't had challenging moments.
Yeah.
I've had plenty of moments where I've had to just stop myself and go take some deep breaths. Mm-hmm. You know, everybody has those times.
Discipline is clearly still a need.
Yes, but I mean, but the thing is, one thing that's very important to me in my household is we reinforce self-discipline very early before I think a lot of parents realize that their kids can start showing it.
How do you do that? How do you help children to establish self-discipline?
So part of it is recognizing, paying attention to cues that your kids give you, okay? Mm-hmm. So my toddler, we know when it's time for him to go to sleep, okay? He'll get kind of goofy with his energy. Right. You know, the food he'll stop playing with this food after he kind of goes through stages. He'll eat it, and then, you know, a little while later he's playing with it, and then before we know it, okay, maybe a couple of things are on the floor. Okay, you're getting down and you're picking up your food, washing your hands, and you're going to sleep. Mm-hmm. Because we know that you're at that point, you know.
And this is a 13-month? He's
22 months
22
old.
months, 22 months. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and so we talk to him, though. He can understand a lot more than he can say. Yeah. And he's starting to know when he's tired. Uh-huh. So we don't get a lot of pushback with nap time or with bedtime. He's in a toddler bed already, and you know, there were a couple of times he'd get off as he was exploring it, but you know, we were very deliberate and calm with our approach with getting him there. So he's starting to understand that there are basic needs that he has. Yeah. And when they're not met, he acts kind of goofy, and he'll show us with his behavior that, okay, it's time for rest. Yeah. So having basic things like that, you know, you have to make time for your kids. There are a lot of kids who do not get enough sleep, who don't have their nutritional needs met, mm-hmm. who are spending too much time on electronics and not enough time with like real toys and playing outside, or just playing, you know, with tactile things, real crayons instead of putting your finger on the screen. You know, these things are so important for their basic development. So I can help parents with getting the basics back.
Let me tell you, once someone wrote in and they said, please ask her. I've got 18-year-old twins who've just been a joy. I have a 12-year-old. She went to bed one night and she said, Mommy, I love you. Thank you for being my mom. You're the greatest mom in the world. I'm so happy to be your daughter. And she woke up the next day acting as if she had been touched by something that jumped out of the Megan, whatever her name was, in The Exorcist. You know, that teenage girl that just trips out. And I've got a lot of nieces in my family, and I've seen them be the doll baby one day, and then they wake up the next day, and they are hellions. What happens to teenage girls?
Teenagers are dealing with a whole lot of hormones and identity crisis in motion. You know, they sometimes they don't know what often they don't know what they're doing, and they really do, often when they're acting out, they're asking for more structure and more limits, but they don't even realize that that's what they're doing necessarily.
In their behavior, that is a cry for more structure and more discipline?
They need it. They need it so much, especially now with, how damning their actions in media can be. They really need that secure place to fall with their parents, or some nurturing adult. It can also be, as they become teenagers, they build their support system outside of home too.
This time has gone by very fast. We have a minute left here. What would be your parting words to parents who are searching for that way to help their children become the best they can be? And now what we have, probably about 30 seconds.
Well, I want to say first, thank you so much for having me. I love DC. I love families of DC, and I'm so happy to be serving. Go to my website, happyparentshappybabies.com, and I'm building it. I'll be adding tips. Please email me if you have any questions related to development. I'm happy to offer you resources. Even if I don't have the answer offhand, I'll send you to the right place.
Well, that was said just like a veteran in the business. Thank you so much for coming. Hopefully you have helped. We try to help at the Rock Newman Show. Make the world a better place, one day at a time, one conversation at a time.
The Rock Newman Show. It's the Rock Newman Show. Rock Newman Show.